Hello, and welcome to the Race, Wealth, and Health Podcast, a podcast that serves to educate and empower while we explore the intersections of social justice, economic empowerment, and holistic well-being within communities of color. I am your host, Dr. Joycelyn Morris, and I invite you to join me as we dive deep into the crucial topics that shape our lives, challenge the status quo, and strive for a more equitable future for all.
All right. Hello. Welcome to the Race, Wealth, and Health Podcast. I'm very excited to be back with my guest and friend, Brian Knowles. Welcome, Brian.
Oh, thank you so much. And I appreciate you inviting me into your space and be part of this. Thank you.
Yes. So I am super excited to have you on. Obviously, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more, but Brian Knowles is the manager of African-American, Latino, Holocaust Studies, Jewish History, and Social Studies at Palm Beach County District Schools. So basically, all the other histories, right?
There you go.
The non-normative, right? Eurocentric histories. Love it. And so Brian and I actually met through Leadership Florida, I want to say, right? Because you did the education program. Right?
Well, I did. And that was what, 2022 or something like that when I ran to you? Or something like that. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. 2022 sounds about right. It probably was a couple of years ago. And so we both did Leadership Florida, but just slightly different programs. And I remember running into you. And I think someone introduced you to me. It was like, oh, no, like you're interested in, obviously my interest in work has been in the racial wealth gap and just in that space. And so I remember we connected and just, stayed connected ever since then. But why don't we start by you telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself? Obviously, I shared your title, but I'm sure you're much more than just your title.
So thank you so much, bud. I'm here local, from Palm Beach County, a native, actually fifth generation of Palm Beach County. I went to all Palm Beach County schools and actually went to my college and universities right here locally in the Palm Beach area. Went to FAU and did my undergrad there, and I did my graduate studies at the University of West Florida. I've been in education almost 17 years. Actually, it is 17 years at this point that I've been in public education. I've spent 10 years of that in the classroom as a teacher. I worked at a few of our high schools here. I was a social studies teacher, primarily taught African and African-American studies. And outside of that, I've taught literally every subject area within the social sciences within that time frame. But now I currently work with that long title that you introduced me as, and I've been here for about 8 years at the district, leading a lot of our diversity initiatives and our curriculum with a very specific focus on those areas that are very non-Eurocentric, non-traditional histories, African studies, African-American studies, some Latin American studies, and also the history of the Holocaust and Jewish studies. In addition to those duties, I do oversee our secondary social studies curriculum here at our district. And outside of that, working with curriculum, we do a lot of advocacy for, minoritized populations within our school district. I was responsible for equity initiatives within our school district at some points. I wrote our equity policy. And we also work with teachers, administrators, and other district staff around building capacity with educators around just those content areas, and also pedagogical strategies to engage all learners.
Sounds like a lot of work. Before we kind of get into that, I know you said you started out as a teacher, but did you always know you wanted to be a teacher? Like, how did you kind of get into education in general and then sort of say, hey, this is the area I want to focus on and this is important to me. This is what I'm going to dedicate my life's work, because you actually recently received I forget the title, but the Educators Award from one of our local organizations, Path to College, for your work and so your dedication to this work in this path specifically. So tell us a little bit about how you decided this was it. This was the direction you wanted to go in.
Good question. So I'm going to start off and say, no, I never thought I would be in education. There is no way if you could have went back when I was in high school, middle, or elementary school to say that I was going to be an educator. It wasn't like that at the top of my list. And even the idea at one point, speaking publicly, would have terrified me at one point, to be able to stand in front of people and say anything, so for that matter. But I never liked school. I was never the most engaged student, wasn't a horrible student, but it wasn't my favorite thing. And part of it, the reason why it wasn't my favorite thing is because I got very little exposure within the classroom of who I was. I got very little of my history. I got very little kind of affirmations from the public education system of who I was. And because of that, I always felt deficient and broken to some extent. And of course, growing up in a predominantly Black community as a student, I can definitely say the same about all of the people that I grew up around, and not really knowing our history, not understanding our culture, and not even having the opportunity to center ourselves in the realities and the worlds that we exist in and let that be affirmed in the educational system. It created that disengagement. And because of that disengagement, eventually I wanted to be part of that solution. And, one of the things that I definitely recall is getting my first African American studies book, which my mother brought me from like a book fair, and it was this African American inventors. Because of that, I just kind of set me down a trajectory of learning more about my history, more about my culture outside of school, of course. But I wanted to actually get into education so I can normalize the things that we weren't being taught in schools to be taught within the classroom. So we can see ourselves and be affirmed to who we are within our history and culture.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, so you said a lot there, right? You said that wasn't kind of originally what your thought process was.
Definitely.
So like back then, like what did you think you wanted to do, right? Back in high school.
I know this gonna sound crazy, but I wanted to be a rapper at one point, right? So, me growing up in high school, I actually wanted to be a musician, a rapper. So that was like the goal that I had for myself and set for myself is to be a rapper. But just unfortunately, I probably wasn't the best at it like I thought I was. And it was really my parents who kind of forced me to really take a different path and start to take a different path serious. It just, unfortunately, that is the issue that a lot of young Black males kind of contend with within the school system. It was not going to be an entertainer, it was going to be an athlete. And we are kind of compelled to do that again, because, and not that anything is wrong with those paths and those trajectories, because some of us do make it around on those paths, but a lot of us don't. And the reason why we're forced to take those paths is that we can only sometimes be what we think that we're exposed to and what we see. And if I see myself, saturated within the entertainment industry, and the entertainment industry does involve athletics, so athletics is a form of entertainment. I think that's, one of my only paths and one of my only options. So again, that's one of those things also that compelled me. It's like, I have to, get within a system to create that transformation for our students. And when I say our students, our people can see beyond the structural dimensions and start to dream and see wider possibilities through history and through education.
I mean, that's quite the journey, right? But I hate to say it's not surprising, right? The entertainment, like usually it's entertainment, sports, music, that a lot of our young people kind of gravitate towards, to your point, because there's not like a lot of
Right.
representation. So even to talk about that, like what was your experience being in the classroom? Because there's definitely a shortage of Black male teachers, right? And so what was that experience for you in terms of like being able to be in the classroom and be that representation that you didn't have?
Definitely a very fulfilling experience. I love every year, every minute, and every moment that I was able to be around students and be around kids. And most importantly, be around students and affirming those students through my lessons and being able to literally every year that I taught, I was able to teach African American studies and just being within that environment and helping my students cultivate pride. I don't really believe in the idea of empowering of students. And that sounds crazy when I say that. But the reason I say that is I feel like our students and our people have power already, right? We just need just the environment to help us discover that power and fully cultivate it. And being in the classroom allowed me to, cultivate that power within my students and create that pride that they needed to see beyond just the dimensions and see beyond just what they were exposed to. So I would say it was very rewarding and very fulfilling, experience by being around students, being in the classroom, being able to engage and being able to inspire.
Yeah, absolutely. I can only imagine that it was. And so let's talk about, I guess, kind of the aha moment that took you from the classroom into the district space and expanding your reach as it related to really focusing on curriculum, right? Of what is being taught in the space of history.
So absolutely. So I wouldn't say there was one specific or particular aha moment, but it was aha moments, that kind of led me into what I wanted to do. Because one of the first things is that, yes, I was able to make that connection and may inspire students within just my sphere of influence of where I was. But, I felt that I was confined, right? And I kind of felt that I kind of reached my ceiling in the classroom. And even as I found out that the issues that I contended with, because when students would come in a classroom, they wouldn't have that pride because they wouldn't know their history yet, right? So when we start having conversations and engaging them and starting to explore our histories, then you see that. But we see when I could notice that we have systemic deficiencies across this country that does not enable our students to see themselves. I had one of those moments that I have to kind of get outside of this box, and I have to take this work on a broader scale and work within systems so I can help transform institutions. I just had a desire to make a larger impact, and I just couldn't stop where I was. And the things that I was doing were great, and I was able to, inspire hundreds of students every year. But I wanted to kind of think bigger than that and see how ways I can inspire thousands, or how I can work with other adults. Because even that's another moment, because when I said aha moments, even, my working with colleagues and other teachers that were unaware of their history, right, as well. And we always talk about what schools don't teach, right? But we have to understand that teachers can only teach what they know. Right. And we all have come through the same educational system. We've been exposed to the same things and not exposed to the same things as well. So I also wanted to work with other adults and other educators to help build capacity and content knowledge and inspire them so they can also carry that work back to our kids as well.
Awesome. So let's talk about this role. Like, was this an existing role, and was it always covering the sort of 5 to 6 different, like, oriented history? Like, I'm just curious what has potentially been the evolution of this role? Because this definitely is something I remember existing, like, coming up in Palm Beach County schools, which I also attended all Palm Beach County schools as well.
Absolutely. The work has already existed, right? So I'm never going to credit myself as I created this, right? So this actually office or this department was actually been in existence within Palm Beach County Schools since 1994. So the work had been already the foundation had already been set. Back in 94 was Mrs. Debbie Range, Margaret New, and that kind of started this department working within the school district and really breaking down some of those barriers that I'm able to do what I do today because of the barriers that they broke down. So the work had already been here. So when I got here in 2016, there was a vacancy within this department for about a year. So the work was like literally in the midst of dying at that point. So when I came in, I had to definitely deal with the challenges of reinvigorating it and almost kind of redefining the work, and also helping the work kind of adapt to new times and new changes, right? Because that's one of the things that a lot of educators don't always do a very good job with, is contending with just the evolution of society itself, right? Even back to your question, when it first started back in 94, it used to be just the Office of African and African American Studies. But throughout the years, it continually so when I initially got the position and came and took leadership over the work back in 2016, it was African and Latin American studies. Then eventually Holocaust studies was added to it. Then the gender studies was added to it. But unfortunately, back in 2021, the state of Florida kind of banned, talking about, those kind of topics in public education. So the gender studies was removed, and eventually Jewish studies was added to it. And I foresee this continually to expand to a point that we're going to have to call it something else at some point, right? Because the title is long as it is, and we're going to have to condense it into something that makes more sense and that kind of represents just the diversity that this work represents itself.
Yeah. And so a couple of questions from that, but I think one of the things we talked about in our intro call, I was using the term multicultural. You were like, not a fan. Speaking of condensing, right? Right. So I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts around that. And as you approach this work in certain terminology, and before we kind of shift into like, what is the current state of social sciences in schools?
Absolutely. So when the word multiculturalism, I'm not liking it. It's not that I don't like the word. I think sometimes it becomes a buzzword in education, right? Certain words, you say equity, you say diversity, you say multiculturalism, you say culture responsive teaching. All of these terms are very valid terms, right? And they're very valid terms that should be utilized in education spaces. But But what happens is sometimes we overuse those terms, and sometimes the terms are usually used in a context where they don't fit. And when it comes to all of those terms, I think they should just be embedded in what we just naturally do within education, right? Without necessarily calling it out all the time. Because we are in a diverse society that is evolving into more diversity, and we're becoming more and more of a multicultural, multiracial society. In addition to we have historically used terms as like minorities and minoritized populations, which are technically our global majority in a lot of cases, right? So to address that, and even stay ahead of the curve of where we are shifting demographically, I just think that all of that, when it comes to diversity and multiculturalism, should be just what we do naturally, right? In addition to sometimes when we say multicultural, we think that we only use multicultural education within multicultural spaces, if that makes any sense, right? And what I mean by that is sometimes when it comes to teaching Black history or Latin American history, right, we think that we only supposed to teach that to those student populations. But what we need to really fully realize is that the world that we live in came into existence through the contributions of diversity anyway. Right. And that's the way that we should approach it. And that's the way we should teach it. When we teach history lessons, we need to shift away from that real traditional Eurocentric approach and perspective of things and really learn how to approach topics and approach history and just approach our society from the diverse perspectives, what created our society. So that's what I meant by that when we say diversity, and why I say like multiculturalism, sometimes why I can't stand just hearing it. Because I think it's overused in certain spaces, and I think sometimes it's used in a wrong context. And I just think that multicultural education should just be simply just education itself.
No, and that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. It should be, right? But we live in some very interesting times.
Absolutely.
So one of the reasons I was excited to have you on the podcast and chat about what's happening. Everybody knows Florida has definitely been in the news around our state stances on education and when it comes to DEI and just all of the things that
Mhm.
sort of come down. And so I was curious, specifically in your role. I imagine all those things affect you directly. To maybe just break down what is sort of the current state of social sciences in schools here in Florida, and then in general, because it's felt like teaching all the histories has been something it has felt like it's been under attack, right? At least that's what you hear in the media. So I thought it would be for you to just share what your actual experience has been in this space.
Yeah, that's a good question. All your questions are good. Let me start there, right? But this is actually one of my favorite ones, right? Because I've been to answer that sometimes because of the work that I represent and how people always stop and ask me, about the state of this and talking about the state of the political climate that we live in. And even sometimes people are shocked that Black history, for example, even exists within public education still. But it's very much alive, and it does exist. There has been a lot of legislation that has passed over the couple of years that has been harmful. There has been legislation that has been passed that has created just that perception, right? And a lot of the perception kind of started a couple of years ago when our state had banned AP African American Studies. And, one of the things I have to always kind of bring up to people is that AP African American Studies wasn't taken out of Florida schools. We never had it in the first place, right? It's a new course that College Board created only a couple of years ago. So it never existed here, and it was only being piloted in a few of our schools, right, before it was blocked. And the reason it was blocked, based on what legislation said, I'm going to say that much, is because of a queer studies unit that was existed in it that the College Board had refused to. In addition to, people must understand that AP, which is advanced placement courses, is ran by an outside entity that is not connected to any of our school districts, first of all. So I have no control over that, never had any control over that, or any of our school districts have any control over creating a curriculum for AP African American Studies. We just can green light the course to allow in our school district. But as far as the state of it today, yes, African American Studies is very, very much alive. I'm going to at least speak for Palm Beach County and some of our neighboring school districts, which here in Palm Beach County, we have one of the largest, if not the largest, African American Studies program in our state, and probably rivals some of the other districts in other states and in our country. and we still offer it. All of our high schools, with exception maybe one or two, don't offer African American studies. So it is something that is offered in our classrooms. It's still authentic, right? And I'm going to say that much because, right, people say, oh, it's one thing to teach history and it's one thing to teach a sanitized version of history. And as long as I'm here, I'm going to make sure that we maintain our history, that we maintain our stories, and maintain the authenticity of our stories within our classroom. So we're still teaching it. We still teach African history, African American history, and there are 4 more African American history related courses that are offered as electives in our district. In addition to, we do create resources, programs, and curriculum for K through 5 as well. So there are lessons, there are things that we embed within just the core curriculum, and even other supplemental materials for teachers can teach African American studies K through 5 as well.
Okay. I mean, that definitely does help to explain some of what happened, right? Like you said, what got banned. And so what are some things that we as community members and voters, right? Because we're definitely in election season, should be thinking about when it comes to, or you mentioned there has been some harmful legislation. And so what are some of the things that we should be thinking about? What are the things that keep you up at night when it comes to, potential legislation or murmurings of things that may get banned or removed from curriculum?
Okay. I think a few things. I'm gonna say 2 things that are always kind of be a proponent for our community be proponents of themselves, right? Is first thing I would say is holding our districts and our schools accountable, being more proactive, right? I just really wish we shift out of this reactive culture when we wait till something happens to kind of galvanize. But I think we should galvanize what already exists and the things that are already in place and promote the utilization of those things already, right? So, there are other communities that exist right here in Palm Beach County. When I say communities, groups of people who advocate for their stories to be heard. And I really charge our community as well to do the same. To hold our schools accountable, even if it's an individual school, right? Even I tell parents, I tell community stakeholders all the time, right? If they're, to change systems and change institutions is a beast, right? You got institutions that's been around before most of us were even born that's been this way, right? Not saying that we shouldn't challenge it, not saying we should advocate to change it, right? We should. Things have to start small sometime, right? And even if it's your sons or daughters or granddaughters or friends of a family, kids that go to a specific school, hold those schools accountable, right? See if they're offering these courses, see what they're doing, see what are the platforms and initiatives for making sure that they have an embrace culture where all of our histories are taught, right? In addition to, you can come here to the board, just like you have other people that come to board meetings that speak their grievances and advocate for their interests. We should do the same as well. But my biggest thing is that, first of all, let's get the facts and we gather our facts, we get accurate information, and that way we take that information and we know how to fight and what to fight for. But we have to fight not for when things happen, but we have to take a concerted effort to be proactive and protect what we have in place.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you started to touch on it, but it feels like a good segue as well. Again, individuals, community members, what should we be thinking about when it comes to understanding or promoting, again, buzzword, but DEI, diversity and inclusion in education, or whether it's just equity and inclusion, right? Because I know that's the new shift and folks focusing on that. What could that look like? I know you mentioned getting involved with some of the community members. What are some initiatives and things that are coming out of your office around that type of work?
Absolutely. So I would definitely say, first, as community members, before we step out to fight, right? And I'm not saying you have to do this, right? Is interrogate, figure out the facts, find out the deficiencies, look at the gaps that we have, which is all, public information. And this is something that you can always address with our school districts, and even address with me to figure out what we're doing, what are our gaps, what are our obstacles, and even some of the challenges that we are facing as team members who are trying to push this work forward within our district. So really getting those facts together. In addition to, within our department, is that I believe in complete transparency with our public. So, and also full involvement and engagement with our community around what we do. So even when it comes to the professional learning opportunities that we provide for our teachers and our administrators and our leaders and, people who work within our school district, that we always leave it open for the community to join us as well, right? So we have like all our PDs. I have a website that I created that is literally open to the community, right? They can go in and see literally all the lessons, all the curricular resources that we provide to our teachers in schools, in addition to a list of all of the professional development that we do so they can join us with registration links for the community, right? So we welcome people in so they can see what is transpiring within the system and also find ways that they can learn the same things that our teachers are learning and even sometimes take it back to the community, right? Because we have a very valid reason not to trust our educational systems and institutions, right? Especially as Black folks, we got a reason why not to trust a lot of stuff, correct? But
Yeah.
we can also go and take this stuff back to our churches, our community center, like even into our living rooms and dining room tables at home, right? So I release that stuff out to our teachers. I release that out to our community stakeholders so they can join us, so they can be part of what we're doing. And even taking what we're doing outside of our classrooms and outside of our schools and empowering ourselves within a community to be responsible for teaching our people and our children.
Yeah, that's actually, I was going to say that, but you went there for me already. I think there's always sort of this question of how much responsibility should schools have? And I know when I was doing my graduate studies, conversation around what is truly the purpose of schools? And the original evolution of schools were something very different than kind of what it is now. And certainly our schools should be teaching our kids, don't get me wrong, but do we sometimes rely way too heavily on schools to do all the things, right? And what really should be the purposes of schools and how much should we as individuals, parents, relatives, and just community members expect to also fill in that gap versus, the expectations of students to get everything from schools, right? And I think that's,
100%. Yeah.
I feel like that's part of parents. Yeah. Yeah. And even I think
we still,
and I think you even spoke to that with your own experience of your mom kind of bringing certain history to you. She didn't rely on the schools to do all the things. And so there was still this sort of filling in the gap that then allowed you to become interested in this type of work, or at least spark the interest for you, right?
yeah, absolutely. We have to, as a people, don't expect other people to liberate us, right? Especially those who are responsible for our oppression. We can't, sit around waiting for somebody else to save us, and we must save ourselves and look out and advocate for ourselves. A part of the advocating for ourselves is just really just taking action and finding some kind of space and some kind of way to educate our children. I understand the demands of work, and a lot of our people, we got to work a lot sometimes in some of those cases, right? That we may not have the time on our hands to go to a SAG meeting or go to events in the evening at a school, right? I'm not saying, not using it as an excuse or justification, but more so just providing a grace and empathy for our people and those who can't engage the way that they want to. In addition to, sometimes our schools don't do a very good job in engaging parents, but there is a responsibility and there's a high degree of accountability that we must have as a people to make sure that we protect our interests, and our number one interest should be our children. So we need to do what it takes to protect them and don't wait for someone else to do what they're supposed to do. Simultaneously, also holding that same system accountable, right? As taxpayers, the schools belong to us just as much as anybody else, right? So we can't really just absolve the schools for their responsibility of teaching our children. There should be a partnership where we do teach our children, but don't leave it solely based on our schools to do that, because if we do that, we see the impact and we see the implications of where we are today because of that. So I just wanted to add that.
You're absolutely correct.
Well, that's all for today, folks. Enjoyed the show? Be sure to like and rate the podcast. You can find the Race, Wealth, and Health podcast on multiple platforms, including Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications so you never miss an episode. I also want to hear from you, so don't forget to connect with me on social media. You can follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook at Race, Wealth, Health. By joining the online community, you'll stay updated on the latest episodes, behind the scenes insights, and engaging discussions. Share your thoughts, comments, and questions there. I appreciate your support in sharing the podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues who may also find value in these conversations. Thank you again for joining me on this journey. Until next time, take care, stay informed, and keep up the good fight for equality.